plenary of the annual meeting of the Economic Research Forum. Just a few announcements before we get started. I am Ishaq Diwan. I will be chairing and moderating an exciting panel. The few announcements are first that there is translation في ترجمة. If you want to hear in Arabic, إذا بتحبوا تتسمعوا في العربي اضغطوا على interpretation الزر interpretation يلي تحت على اليمين. And you have to choose Spanish to mean Arabic. I should also tell you that this event is being recorded, and it's also playing live on the ERF YouTube channel. We will have several presentations, and then we'll have question and answers and a lively discussion, hopefully with the participants. So this panel, to introduce it, focuses on the very important and really novel, relatively novel issue of digital transformation and the technological change in the Arab world and also globally, by focusing on four important questions. The first question is how is this digital transformation affecting economic growth, job creations and employment through its impact on key sectors of the economy? The second question is, what is the impact of this digital transformation on human development, and in particular on inequality and on the process of poverty reduction? The third question that panelists will be asking is what has been the role of COVID-19, of the pandemic, in accelerating digitalization and also in revealing new social vulnerabilities in some countries. And finally, we will also be focusing on the policy options available for various countries to address the challenges of the new technologies in the various parts of the Arab world. So to answer these extremely important questions that will shape the future in many ways, we have three eminent experts. Two will make presentations and one will be a discussant. So we have with us Sharouk Fardoust, a highly respected economist and I must say a long-time friend with a long and rich experience in crafting and shaping economic research and policy at the World Bank and also in other organizations. He's now a professor at the College of William and Mary in the United States. We also have Mustafa Nabli, also an old friend, who is an economist and at various points in time an academic, policymaker. He's been minister, he's been head of central bank, he's been a politician and a presidential candidate, and he's also a widely published and respected researcher and opinion maker. Last but certainly not least is Paola Pagliani is with us. She's the research coordinator of the UNDP Regional Hub in Amman for the Arab states. She's a very experienced and dedicated development practitioner with a deep focus on promoting human development. And I should note that the three of them have been at the core of a partnership between the UNDP and ERF on a project to understand the implication of digital transformation in the region. And so they would be giving us also some of the highlights of that research project. So without further ado, we're going to start with Sharouk, about 15-minute presentation. Then we'll move to Mustafa and to Paula in that order. So Sharouk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ishaq, for a very kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen now, and please tell me whether you see it or not.
It's coming. We see.
You see it now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Well, my presentation basically has 4 parts. First, a very brief overview of the global and regional trends as of mid-2021. Then some discussion, brief discussion of a very complex phenomena that has been happening before our eyes, but very few people know exactly what's been going on, and that's the changing nature of globalization. Then going over the main topic of the research, which is digitalization, and its interaction with the global economy, with countries' economies, and with the globalization process itself. And the fourth part would be very brief discussion of what COVID-19 has done to this ongoing process of globalization and global connectivity that has been going on for several decades. But finally, I will end with some of the key messages that are coming from the four background thematic papers that have been done for this research project on the globalization, inequality, fintech, and e-commerce, and end with a list of some preliminary lessons as of June 24th, 2021. And the methodology is basically a desk review of this material and some review of the some of the evaluations that have been taking place on the support that is being provided by international organizations to developing countries on digitalization, how to deal with it. And then also the review of the thematic papers, and then coming up with the, identifying the key issues at a regional global level. And Mustafa's presentation will go into much richer country level assessment. On the regional trend, on the global trends, I think it is important to mention that there is basically a major shift taking place in terms of global economic center of gravity towards Asia. Asia has always been, the most populous part of the planet, about 50% of population, but their share of production and trade is now the largest on the planet, and now they account for about 40% of GDP, and I think about 30% of world trade, and it's continuing in that direction. Developing countries, on the other hand, who make up a big chunk of Asia also, but they are now beginning to, which have been experienced very rapid growth in the past 3 decades through the process of globalization. They are seeing some headwinds because the nature of globalization is changing, and it's changing because of, in part, because of digitalization. But fortunately, as we will discuss, there are many policy instruments and initiatives that actually could they could embark and put them back on the rapid but more inclusive and more sustainable growth going forward. At the regional level, I think the MENA region, the Arab world, has been basically growing at a fairly low rate of growth compared to their own historical record, and in part because of the political changes, social changes in the region, in part also because the region is vulnerable to the shocks that come from the global economy. Many countries, of course, depend on their export, oil exporters, tourism, and the various connectivity they have with both Europe and other parts of the advanced economies, and shocks that come to the rest of the world also, of course, affect them. And the region is going to is on the cusp of going through a major transformation as the global effort will be is initiated to decarbonize production, and since this region in particular depends on fossil fuel exports, and the wealth that has been generated has actually affected the entire region, benefited the region to a large extent, is going to, that transformation is going to be very important. And I think you will see that digitalization actually would be part of that transformation. And this one chart just wanted to, it summarizes where the region is. The blue line and this chart is the rate of growth of the Arab countries as a group from 1976. It's an annual GDP growth rate. And the orange line is the advanced economies growth rate. And as you can see, there have been, kind of in some periods synchronized, because there is another factor, independent, but in a sense, and also as a function of global growth, is the price of oil, which is these gray bars. These fluctuations in the advanced economies' economic growth and the oil price fluctuations have affected the region. And so it's been a region that has had a fairly volatile growth path. The other point is that it is on a downward trend since early 2010, and which is affecting their macroeconomic ability to deal with newer shocks that are coming. So as of today, the good news is that the global economy is on a rebound from a very deep recession in 2020, the very timely and large policy packages introduced by major economies, particularly the US, but also other advanced economies within the G7, those developing countries that could take action, including the GCC members in the MENA region, where they do have the financial wherewithal to intervene. So there is a recovery coming, but it's not very clear whether it's going to be long-lasting or not, and what comes after these packages kind of run their course. Whether, basically there will be a self-sustaining growth path or not. So there's uncertainty, and it also depends a lot on the course that the virus will take, whether there is going to be a return of the different variations of it or not. And the vaccination rate, of course, as we will discuss later, varies a lot across countries. Generally, poorer countries received less vaccination, less protection, and within countries, large majority of population which are at the lower income levels also are less protected. So inequality has actually been rising, not just because of the way the global economy works, but also the way that this particular shock has affected the world economy. The one important thing on this table, which is basically summarizes the global economic performance since 2009, is that the financial crisis shock of 2009 was much smaller than the pandemic shock that we still experiencing in 2020. Global economic growth was negative 0.7%, and now it is 2020 was minus 3.5%. And as you can see, also the Arab states had a small positive growth during the financial crisis shock, but they suffered a significant loss of income in 2020, minus 4.2. Same thing with world trade has been hit, and oil prices were hit. So these shocks were both very large, but the pandemic shock has been much larger for developing countries this time around. And the second point is that the global economy, this connection among countries, is a part of this. That how these shocks get propagated very quickly across the world. So this calls for cooperation among countries and coordination of policy. Otherwise, there will be long-lasting scars. Now, going
Farouk, Dear friend, just to tell you that it's 5 to 10 minutes max left.
Okay, thanks. So the second important issue that I want to point out to is that the nature of globalization is changing, and there has been a talk about deglobalization because the rate of growth of trade has lagged growth of output, so the ratio of world trade to output has been declining. But as you can see from this chart, which is by McKinsey, actually much of the trade has become invisible because it's become much more knowledge-based, and the knowledge-based trade is not measured very accurately because the knowledge and data is embedded in all these activities. So McKinsey, when they added up the different parts of this trade that is taking place on the basically in terms of services trade, basically it actually exceeds it exceeds the level of goods trade as of 2017. So the knowledge-based services trade at the global level is now much larger than before, and it's on par with the goods trade. Now, digitalization is a very important phenomenon which is actually helping this changes that are taking place. It's a generalized, general purpose technological revolution that has to, people call it the fourth industrial revolution after, the industrial revolution of the 1700s. And it has two very important aspects to it. It's labor saving and it's highly skill biased. So in a sense, it is potentially very important for growth and economic activity, but it has to be seen in light that it may actually not create many jobs, and the jobs that it will create will require much higher level of human capital than before. So with that in mind, the general categories that policymakers and our project has focused on deal with the automation, artificial intelligence, which affects the future of work, financial technology and fintech, which is the introduction of finance and technology into finance, the e-governance and e-government, digitalization of government services, and e-commerce, like Amazon and Alibaba and all the other activities that are taking place through the service platforms. And it has also some very important applications for agriculture. This chart, the orange line basically is the per capita income of the advanced economies, and the blue dotted line is the per capita income of developing countries. And the purpose of this chart is to show that these important, starting from the industrial revolution to the ICT revolution and not to digitalization, have come, and it appears that it have affected both rich and poor countries. But the important thing is that the gap hasn't really, in terms of per capita income, hasn't shrunk substantially. At the country level it has, but not for all. This other chart also basically points to the fact that different categories of digitalization, like 3D printing, the internet of things, data trends and so forth, use of drones, and things that are digitalized, artificial intelligence, which combined in terms of the market size, about $350 billion in 2018, is estimated to reach about $3.2 trillion in 2025. I think is already surpassing that because of the acceleration that has taken place because of COVID in terms of digital economy. Now, this chart, it basically, the main point is that the skill bias that this technology has is going to favor more advanced countries because the light blue color segment of these bars is the proportion of the labor force by income group that is for the high skilled workers, and the dark blue segment of this chart is because the lower skilled and also skilled but in agriculture sector, and so which are low productivity sectors. In 2020, the left bar on the left side shows that for low income countries, the proportion of the employment that was accounted by high skilled workers was only 5.9% of the labor force, while in high income countries in 2020, it was almost 42% of the labor force was considered high skilled. So if the technology that is coming and is already affecting sectoral production, trade, finance, and across the board, is basically going to be skill bias, this chart tells you that upper middle income countries, emerging economies, as well as high income countries are in a better position to take advantage of that. This chart shows you that there is a gap in terms of access because you need to have access to the internet, to high-speed internet. It's not just the mobile phone that's important, but in order to take full advantage of digitalization, one has to have access to high-speed internet. And in that, if you look at the lower set of bars at the bottom of the orange line is the where the advanced economies, developed countries are in terms of access, and the gray bar is where the low-income countries are. And the developing countries, which is the lower middle income and the middle income countries, is somewhere in the middle. So there is still a very, this is as of 2018, it's a very major gap. And this has to do with infrastructure, the investments that have taken place. And that is one gap. The second gap is, of course, that access has to be affordable. And that is the next chart. These are estimates by UNCTAD, United Nations Trade and Development Organization, which has estimated as of 2016 that the cost of price of the 1 gigabyte of data, because digitalization is a very intensive data use, was about 20.7% of per capita GDP of the low-income countries in 2016, while for high-income countries, which is on the right-hand side, was only 1.1%. So the cost of actually accessing, suppose the infrastructure is there, but the service has to be affordable, and you can see that for the poorer you are, the less affordable it is in terms of the income levels. Now, very quickly, this is I want to connect this again to digitalization, but where the global economy is. This is from OECD just last month. The blue line is the trend. If there was no COVID shock, that's where the global economy would be as of end of 2022. The orange and this other line, these two other lines show the impact of the shock to the global economy, and the orange line, embeds, assumes all the fiscal and monetary packages that have been introduced to revive the global economy. And you see that after it's actually the improvement from the initial, by the end of 2020, still, we are going to be about $3 trillion in terms of the global output below where it would have been otherwise. let me just quickly go to this chart. This is again by OECD. It shows that how the pandemic affected inequality in the various countries, and these are the number of jobs created, for each period going from beginning of 2019 to 2020, and if you focus on the total employment, you will see that the red is the jobs created for those who are highly skilled, and blue is the jobs created for those who are medium skilled, and green is for low skilled. So, dominant creation of the jobs over the period of COVID has been for high skilled, and those who have basically lost employment, and not all of them have come back to their jobs is because of the the skill levels. And finally, I want to just point out that there is some evidence that has been presented by a report by the IMF staff to the G20 just earlier this month about the impact of pandemic on productivity from using the lens of digitalization. And what they found out that actually the initial shock to productivity was that the firms that were more productive had a better chance of surviving the shock. Of course, the less productive firms also were, in many countries, were saved through government programs. But what this research shows that they would not have been able to continue without government aid because the level of productivity in them was not sufficiently high for them to be able to absorb this shock. But more importantly, what they found is that the firms with the higher productivity who were able to absorb the shock with less help from government actually were much more digitalized than the firms that did not get the government help. So let me just go in terms of the four background papers that have been done. I have 5 minutes.
Well, you're on overtime, so
okay.
Use your minutes sparingly.
Okay. Let me just focus on this. That policies to contain COVID pandemic have profoundly affected the economies across the world, and the relationship with digital technology has been very important. I think most important point is that without digital technology, the recession would have been much deeper, especially in advanced economies where digital technology was available and connectivity was much higher. Important implication is that developing countries, in particular the Arab countries that do have gaps in this area, need to invest in digital infrastructure, and more importantly, in parallel, in the quality of human capital in order to be able to take advantage of these advances in technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharof. Really, you really painted the landscape here that would allow us to think about what this all implies for the region. A fast-changing world, new to the spread of digital and new technologies, transforming the global economy through rising productivity on the one hand and increased inequality on the other. Inequality within countries and inequality across countries due largely to changes in the return to education, but also in access of firms and households to these technologies and the services provided. All of this very much exacerbated during COVID, that has really revealed how firms and households that are more educated, have better access to technology, did much better than the rest of the population. So now, by the way, we have a wonderful group of participants, and as we move to the Q&A, I hope that some of you who are experts in these fields would also take the opportunity to perhaps contest or give more detail on that broad landscape. So without waiting more, Mustafa, what does it all mean for the region? What have you learned as you plunge into this topic in the past few months? You're still on mute. You're still muted, Mustafa. You need to unmute. No, you're still muted. Okay, now you're sharing your screen, but I still do not hear you, Mustafa. You're still muted, Mustafa. You're still muted. We cannot hear you. Shireen, can you unmute it from
I
your
can't
side?
unmute him. I can ask to unmute. I asked him to unmute, but
Yes.
he needs to do it his end.
Okay.
Okay, because I could not unmute while
Yes.
the screen
We hear
sharing
you.
was on.
Okay.
Alhamdulillah.
You're good now.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, okay, let me, where is it? What is it? What is the presentation? What is this?
You need to select the right one, Mustafa.
I cannot find it anymore, so I don't know what's happened.
Do you have it open? Can you switch to PowerPoint? And
It is open, but I don't know what happened. Oh, I lost it because I closed it, so that's why. So I have to open it again.
do you want me to?
No,
from my
okay. Mustafa, take your time. Reopen your slide.
Do you have it now?
No.
No.
You
Okay.
have to share screen.
Okay, I have to share screen. Where is it? This technology is great, but it is not so.
It's not perfect yet.
So I open, but I cannot find. Oh, what is it?
Did you share screen at the bottom, that green button?
Yes, I share, but I cannot find my presentation, even though I opened it.
Do you want me to share from my end?
Just hold on a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on. You shared it.
I did.
I did. Okay, I mean that's as well.
So do you move the things, Shireen? Then
Yeah.
Sure.
Shireen, show the slides, and you'll tell her next.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, next slide. So this project, we tried to understand what's going on. So starting from the next slide, please. By reviewing what's going on, I don't understand. I cannot see what's happening on the.
If you like, you can just go to your PowerPoint.
I lost the screen. I don't know what's going on. I lost the screen from the connection, so I don't know.
I'll stop sharing.
Yes, please.
Are you back on the speaker screen now?
I don't know. I lost the screen completely.
I'll try sharing again and tell me if you can see it.
No, I can see it, but I cannot see. I cannot see it changing. I don't see. No, I see it in. I don't know. There's something wrong. I don't know what's wrong, but something wrong.
You know what we can do? Just open your PowerPoint and make your presentation, and we will flip as you go.
I think he's logged out.
He logged out. Okay.
Mustafa?
Yes, I'm here, but I lost the screen of Zoom, so I don't see what's going on.
And you switched off the camera. Do you want to go out and come in again?
Yes, I should. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I ask our participants for a bit of patience, and we'll get organized again very quickly.
Do you see me now?
Your camera is off. At the bottom of the screen, there's a mic and then there's a video, start video. So you need to press on start video.
I don't see it anymore, so I don't see it. I don't know what's going on.
I'll send you ask to start video. You just need to say yes.
Okay, just don't do anything, please.
Okay.
Now,
You're on, and we see you.
You're back on camera.
okay, now everything is fine. You see it now. You see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Super.
All is well.
Sorry for this. So by reviewing what's happening, what we know on the region, we find that over the last 6 or 7 years, there has been a lot of publications on digitalization in the region. But the main feature of this is that it all talks about the potential. What might happen given what we know what's happening elsewhere. These reports by private consulting firms or international organizations like ESCO and so on have not been looked at what's happening on the ground. And the major message of this report has been that we expect to see a major impact of digitalization and automation on the job markets in the Arab region. But on the other hand, we really there is little work or no work on what's actually happening on the ground. So what this project tries to do is tries to understand what's happening on the ground. So we're not talking about potential. We're not talking about what might happen if we translate what's happening in the advanced countries into the Arab region. So that's the object of this. So in order to focus a little bit, we're not dealing with the whole gamut of digitalization issues. I like to distinguish between 3 major domains of digitalization. One is the individual and social space. It's really what individuals are doing through digitalization. One is what's happening through government public services, and one what's happening at the business level, in business, in production and exchange. And I am going to focus, and our project has focused on the latter part. We have not looked really focused that much on individuals and social media and social space, private connection, and what's doing to connecting people and so on. We have not focused that much on government public services, and we focus on business and production and exchange. Like what's happening in e-commerce, fintech, digital travel, robotization in manufacturing, agriculture, industry, and health and education, and so on. So these are the kinds of businesses impact we are looking at. We have undertaken 8 country case studies: Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Tunisia, and Saudi Arabia. You'll see the authors' names on the screen. And let me thank the authors, by the way, here. And I see that many of them are connected, are joining us on this session. So they are the ones who have produced most of this information and the analysis that I'm going to present. So let me start by giving you the bottom line of what we have found. Really 3 major messages that I at this stage, knowledge about the impact of digitalization on the region, on the Arab region, is very limited. We don't really know very well what's happening. There has been little research to assess in any systematic way the repercussions on productivity growth, on jobs and labor markets, as well on social indicators such as poverty or inequality. The second main message that we come out with, to the extent that some evidence is available, and there is some evidence, the impact of digitalization on Arab countries has been until now quite limited. We have not observed yet any major disruptions in the production space, which produce a measurable impact on overall productivity growth or on jobs. We have not in general. It has been limited. The third message, that there is quite a significant amount of specific or detailed evidence which shows that digitalization is starting to impact the social and economic outcomes, is starting to impact. And this mostly in GCC countries where digitalization has advanced most, but much less in other countries like the middle income countries, and certainly much less in the low income countries. So let's detail a little bit, look at these issues a little bit more. Let's have an overview of how much progress in digitalization in the Arab countries has been taking place. We can understand it by making three distinctions, essentially. One, on the groups of countries. We can really distinguish between three main groups of countries. The GCC, there has been strong progress in all aspects of digitalization. There is the group of middle income countries where there has been reasonable progress, close or similar to all the emerging markets. And there is the lagging group of countries, low middle income and conflict countries. On the dimensions of digitalization that I talked about, we see that have been much more advanced adoption by individuals of digitalization. In the individual and social space, there has been much more progress than anywhere else. There has been much less progress in digitalization of public services, and even less on the adoption of digital technologies by businesses in all kinds of businesses. Even though we observe some dynamism in the startup sphere and the ICT-enabled services. I will come back to this eventually. This can be summarized in this chart here, which shows the deep green is really where the highest adoption of technology by individuals and GCCs. And you see the lowest is by the least advanced Arab countries and the ICT production or adoption by businesses. And you see that the deepness of the color is weaker as you go right or you go down. So this gives you a big picture of what's happening, but as is in a simple way. I chose this chart. There are many charts one I could have chosen, but I chose this chart because it illustrates my point. This chart from the Network Readiness Index of 2020 shows the index of adoption of digital technologies by individuals on one side and by businesses on the other side. And you see that in advanced countries, the two indices are very close. There is as much progress on adoption of technology by individuals as by businesses. You see in the Arab countries, the disconnect is huge. There is a huge disconnect between adoption by individuals and adoption by businesses. The emerging, advanced, developing countries are somewhat better than Arab countries, but much less, aligned than advanced countries. So this is a major disconnect that we observe. While individuals have been connected and connecting the digital world, businesses have been much less connected to the digital technologies. So this is a major message, and that we should keep in mind. And I am going to focus from here on the business. Our colleague and friend who has done a good study for us on digitalization, globalization, has summarized it in a different way. The extent to which one can estimate the progress of digitalization in business is through looking at the extent of increase in the services, in servicification of economies, which is the share of services. The increase between 1990 and 1919 in the share of services in the GDP has increased by 7.5 points in the Arab countries. In the rest of the middle income countries increased by 15 points, twice as much. So this means that digitalization is not really taking root in Arab countries as much and it's lagging in terms of using digitalization services in the business sector. It's a very gross and a very simple indicator, but it shows the extent Arab countries are lagging in this extent. Now, I would like to go a little bit deeper and explore the impact of this limited extent of digitalization on various dimensions of the economic sphere. Let's look at jobs and productivity. There's no research available and no really formal evidence on the impact on labor productivity or TFE productivity. And we do not observe any apparent correlation between labor productivity growth and extent of adoption of technologies in the last 20 years or 30 years. So this is really an open domain where we really know little on the impact on productivity growth. Actually, on jobs, there has been recently in the literature a finding that the polarization evidence that we see in advanced countries does not translate in middle-income countries, in developing countries. Actually, we do not see the job polarization happening in developing countries for many reasons. And there is no evidence this is happening in Arab countries as well. The evidence of the country studies do not show any evidence of job polarization, means the contraction of the middle skill and the increase in the low-level skill and the high-level skill. We do not see this for many reasons, what we can discuss. The extent of job losses through disruption of technology by technology is not really available. We don't see it either. There is some evidence of job losses in GCC, essentially due to digitalization in the public services. And there is some evidence of creation of jobs in ICT-enabled services in all countries that we have looked at, whether GCC or non-GCC. So that's as far as we can tell on the jobs and productivity. On employment, on self-employment startups, as I said, this is the most visible impact of digitalization in many Arab countries. Whether GCC, it's in Egypt, it's in Lebanon, it's in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Jordan. So there is very active process of encouraging startups through specific legislation, business facilitation, incubators, accelerators, specialized funding, venture capital, through training, a lot of support. And we are starting to see the emergence of very dynamic sectors, both in GCC and non-GCC countries. There is also the evidence of some impact on employment, but volumes remain weak, limited, and the impact on the overall job market remains to be seen. On trade on goods and services, one should look at the impact at three levels, of three types. First, on the observable arm's length trade, standard trade, through increased productivity, competitiveness, and so on. We do not see that happening in the Arab countries. The second is through the impacting the global value chains, the standard global value chains. And we are not seeing happening in Arab countries as well. The third type is through insertion into new global value chains, the digital value chains. This is starting to happen in some way, but not very big way yet. So that's as far as we can tell on these issues. One of the major, propositions of late, over the last few years, we have seen is that digital transformation may be an opportunity for Arab countries to leapfrog in their development process and diversify their economic activities through technology and digitally-based technologies. There is some tentative evidence, very tentative, very weak, very limited, of some positive impact in GCC countries, the Oman and Saudi Arabia we looked at. But the low level of digital technology take-up in the Middle-income countries does not show any impact on diversification, whether for Algeria, for instance, or natural resource or non-natural resource producing countries. There is another expected impact of digital technology on labor market, on women in the labor market. There is some evidence that digitalization improving the prospects for women to access skilled employment in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. But other factors continue to hold them back. But we do not find any evidence of such an impact in other middle-income countries, whether Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, or Tunisia yet. Finally, we have seen, as Sharaf mentioned, an impact of digitalization on inequality. But as I said, Arab countries have been lagging in the adoption of technologies by businesses in the production. Therefore, it is difficult to observe any impact of inequality that one can trace to adoption of technologies. And actually, the two main channels of impact that have been observed in advanced countries are the skills premium. So the wage premium on high skill increases compared to low skill. And the second channel is to increase market concentration and limited competition in the many markets, whether it's in trade and retail trade or it's in production and so on. And we have not started to see that. We do not see that in either way, either on the skills premium or on the market concentration and competition in Arab countries. We have not observed this impact yet, but it may be coming. The country studies, from the country studies here, I'm going to be quick and just summarize. The major challenges and bottlenecks that is holding back the adoption of digitalization and digital transformation are the availability of digital skills and the quality of education. It comes up top everywhere in all studies, in all country cases. Language has been noted as one constraint, especially in the Gulf countries, where most of the internet is in English and many people don't have proficiency in English. The low progress of e-government in non-GCC countries. E-government is not progressing as it should, as expected. And this is contributing to a limited adoption of digital technology by businesses. Issues of taxation and regulation are still pervasive, and also Arab countries are not engaged in development of global regulations, whether at the European level or global level, WTO, and so on. And the challenges of cybersecurity are still very, very dominant. Based on all of this, we can draw a few lessons and policy priorities, and I'm concluding here. In terms of approaching, global, overall strategies and priority for digitalization, I think experience shows that developing strategic and comprehensive approaches is critical. Piecemeal approaches don't work. They do not deliver results. So countries need to have comprehensive and coherent strategies. Second, the governance of the digital economy needs to be improved. It's weak everywhere. The governance, who does what, who regulates, who does not regulate, how do you enforce, and how do you run the digital economy is really a major issue that is not advancing well. Give priority to digitalization of public services. Countries which are lagging should make it as a priority, and many countries in the region are not making progress. And fourth, in terms of broad strategy, focusing attention on the adoption of digital technologies by businesses is something that should be done, but it is not being done. No country is really taking up that issue. Digital technology adoption by businesses is just happening on its own without any government support or any government overall strategy. This leaves, supposing that you do these strategic approaches and adopt them in terms of policy, what do you need? You need to focus on human capital, on skills and education. This is the most important constraint, the major constraint. Second, you need to improve the overall investment climate. We know this is a story that is well known. I'm not going to spend time. You want to focus on building trust and confidence. Arab countries are lacking in trust in the digital economy. The indicators are weak, are low, and to build better trust and stronger trust, you need to build better regulations, and to need to focus on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not given attention enough, and so people don't trust the digital technologies. Finally, this is where Arab countries are not engaged at all. They're not engaged at the international level in terms of the international dimension of digitalization. There is a lot of work done at WTO and other, other organizations, was on private spheres, which try to coordinate, to try to agree on standards, to agree on rules, and so on. Arab countries are absent everywhere; they're not engaged, and that's where they should engage to be able to jump on the bandwagon of digitalization with its opportunities always at its risks. Let me stop here and thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. This is fascinating. You've painted a picture really of a strong diagnostic, not much going on, with important variations, and you drew the key policy implications that are now on the table. So we have in front of us some important conclusions to consider. Now we move to Paula. Let's hear your views on the topic and your comments.
Thank you, Ishaq, and thank you also to Shahrukh and Mustafa for their very comprehensive and detailed presentation. I think a lot of food for thought. I also would like to extend my thanks to the entire ERF for this joint effort with the UNDP to really bring some additional light to like a theme that is like so important, but as already noted, not very well researched, definitely not in the region. So let me first of all echo Mustafa when we said the purpose of this joint research that we started with ERF, which from our perspective was very much about challenging the general narrative around the digitalization and providing a kind of reality check on what is really going on the ground, what are the real effects. So as we have heard from the findings that were presented so far, we do know that digitalization is advancing, it's advancing fast, but we also know that the pace is different in different places. What is still remain like as a big unknown is the overall impact on the economics, but also like on human development more in general. And I think, the key question for us here is if digitalization and which type of digitalization can help us fostering the type of development change that we would like to see in Arab countries. I think, what also emerged clearly from the research is that the impact of digitalization will ultimately depend on a set of choices. So it's not just a matter of adopting like digital solutions or digital transformations and embracing it. It's also a matter of active agencies and shaping it in ways that are more conducive to what the UN would like to call sustainable development in general. So that's why I think this research is so important, so that it can help us like inform the policies that will need to accompany this type of transformation. Few key points taken from the presentation, from the research, and some reflections here. Our understanding of how digital transformation work is really focused around three main three main foundations of digital transformation, namely infrastructures, capabilities, and the institutional, the planning institutional policy dimension of this. So what we have heard from the research is that in terms of infrastructures, there is a pretty substantive gap within the region. Some sub-regions or some countries in the region are more advanced than others for sure. So a lot of diversity as well. But when I think of the troubling factors here is that access to the digital technologies in many countries is not affordable, which means that this, will prevent like large strata of the population actually to get benefits from possible like digital transformations. In terms of capabilities, I think it's a more of a mixed picture. What we have seen is that the region can benefit from an expanding, relatively well-educated and young population. The data that Mustafa showed about the pickup at the individual level of digital technologies, I think do show that there is like capacity in the region to use, to like work with digital technologies and so on. And also like in some cases, like startup that try to make, like to put this like capabilities into like effective production. But again, linked to the point that I made before, like weak infrastructures and weak policy and regulations can actually prevent to make a good use of the available capabilities. I mean, ultimately, if the demand for digital services is high, I mean, this demand can be satisfied from outside the region, from other countries, services provided like internationally, which would prevent to develop like this type of like businesses and opportunities locally. And likewise, like a well-educated population can easily use the skills that they acquired abroad. And we see like increasing trends, not just in migration. I mean, clearly COVID-19 has put like a kind of halt on migration opportunities, but definitely the aspiration to migrate among the youth population in the region like are very high. The last point about capabilities, I think was already made. I just would like to emphasize again the need to update education systems to really cater for like developing skills that need to be continuously like updated, that need to evolve with the technology. What we have seen now is that there are some sectors without the domain of digital transformation, especially artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, which are in extremely high demand, also because the skills, the people with the right skills in these areas are pretty limited, which means that investing in these areas would create opportunities and clearly also opportunity for better paid jobs and so on. The last point on planning and institutions. So this, I mean, is basically closing the circles, and this is very like keen. So the government policies, fiscal regime can make a difference in terms of the ultimate impact of digitalization. They can shape the market, they can help directing investments. So what I'm getting from the research that was presented so far is that there is an understanding of this in the region. Several governments have tried to like create like an environment that might enable like startup, like SMEs working in these sectors and so on. But overall, the governance aspect of digital transformation is very weak and poorly coordinated and poorly connected to the discourse on digital transformation that happens at the international level, which is basically limiting the opportunity to expand in this area. Another point, going back to the human development issue, we have heard a lot about like productivity. We know that the impact that digital transformation can have on the labor market in Arab countries is very important. There is a huge issue of unemployment, especially of young people. The narrative is clearly that digital transformation can help address this problem. The data, the evidence that is available so far is telling us that productivity impact is almost like non-existent. The other two key factors here are the issue of displacement and then reinstatement. So how many jobs would be eventually displaced or like will disappear because of digital transformation, and how many jobs can be created out of it. Clearly, I mean, the additional element here is that jobs disappearing, job created do not necessarily impact the same group of people, and they can also like fuel like disparities and inequalities in terms of the wage gap for like skilled and unskilled workers. So like all elements will be taken into consideration when we see what's happening in the labor markets. Beyond the labor market, I think like the other important factors for like a whole of society approach and beyond economics is definitely the issue of like service delivery. We have seen like, especially in advanced developed countries, how digital transformation can change and shape the way that services like health and education are provided. Now, the fact that in the region there is still like a pretty substantive digital gaps, and there are people that do not have access to internet, or for which access to internet is too expensive, create like a serious risk here to leave people behind, and also to like limit access to what are basic services for like a good segments of the population, unless, I mean, this digital gap is filled. But the other element here, in terms of potential impact of digital transformation, I think the presentation touched upon the element of cybersecurity. We have seen like how digital disruptions can cause like risk and threats, and also elements that are related to human rights potential violation associated with the spreading of digital transformation. And here, I mean, I don't want to like elaborate or like go too much into detail on this, but just like one element of new type of digital let's say economic like relationship or exploitation that have emerged through this, especially in terms of like data mining and the exposure of people that are basically trading the voluntary, like let's say provision of information that are then commercialized in exchange for services that are so provided for free. So all this field is very much unregulated. It has a potential impact on the population, and we are all exposed to this. Another just a quick point on something that I think it's has emerged very well from the analysis presented so far, and I think it's very important for going forward. The diverse spread of the adoption within sectors in the countries, but also across countries in the region. This is something that UNDP, I mean, can validate, because what we have seen with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been a surge of requests, especially from middle-income countries, to support them in fostering digital transformation, e-governance, and the adoption of digital solutions in service delivery. Like one problem, one vulnerability that has emerged there is the limited fiscal space that non-oil producing middle-income countries are facing, which pose serious limits for them in terms of investing in the necessary like infrastructure, and sometimes even in adopting some of this solution. At the very same, in the very same way, I think beyond like regional diversity, we also are becoming more and more aware that digitalization is not affecting like everybody in the same way. And here, I think it's where I would like to stop my comments in just proposing like a few additional like elements for research to be brought forward, building on the very good baseline that this research has set. Some of this area include, for example, what's happening in conflict countries. We have a number of them in the region. So what is the impact of digitalization, or perhaps missing the digitalization opportunities in the long term for these countries, especially countries that do not have like the institution, or where the infrastructures and the human capabilities at the same time have been depleted by protracted conflict. What's happening in rural communities if services are more and more like being delivered by digital solutions? So how will this impact the life standards in rural communities if they're not properly served? If something is not done for improving the affordability of internet connections, how can low-income groups expect to benefit from some of the opportunities that are being created? And finally, like a point about this persistent digital gap between men and women. Some of the data that we have checked is showing that in countries where the internet penetration is very high, the gap is almost non-existent. But in low-income countries, women tend to be like more excluded than men from the access to internet and the opportunity that comes within. And like Iraq is a very interesting case because the spread there is huge, and like men have almost like universal access to internet and digital technologies, similar to other Gulf countries, while it's barely like 50% of women that are connected to the internet. So I will stop here, not to take too much time, and to leave like other participants in this webinar to express their views. But thank you again for your work and for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paola, for really very rich comments that you put on the table. So let's open the discussion now. I'm going to come back to the panelists and to you as well with various questions from the floor. Let me, and of course, Mustafa and Shahrukh may want to also respond to some of the several very important questions that you put on the table. But let me perhaps summarize some of what's coming out in the chat box and add my tilt to it. Both Riyad and Abir focus on that characteristics, which is that households, in particular in some countries, have much higher penetration among households than among firms and then in e-government, and want to understand the causes and the consequences. And so perhaps speaking a bit on what Paola said, I mean, what this seems to show is that there is a high demand by households, say for e-commerce, for content and the like, but somewhat low supply response by firms to offer these services. And, Mustafa talked about the problem of language. I remember in some of these documents, you hear that the Arab population is about 5% of the global population, and the internet content in Arabic is only 1%. And so many households have difficulties accessing because of language problems. So the key question is why this low supply response, and Mustafa and Paola gave us a long list, but one way perhaps to sharpen the debate is the same old traditional way to ask, is the problem really skills? We don't have people that can do it, or is it the business climate that doesn't allow businesses to get born, to borrow, to deliver these services? And if it is the business climate, is it the same old constraint, or is it a whole new ball game actually? And then one could create these conditions much easier than fixing the traditional business constraints.
Ishaq, I'm not sure I agree with you.
It's a question. You are completely entitled to disagree.
Let me try to on this.
Go ahead.
I think it's not a matter of the supply. There is demand by individuals, and supply is not responding to that demand. There are two different domains. The individuals are engaged in the digital domain through Facebook, through Instagram, and then there is a supply. The supply is there to satisfy their demand. They are connecting on Instagram. They're connecting on Facebook. They're communicating on this technology. So that's a different domain. The other domain of businesses is that the businesses are not adopting technologies in their own business. They're not adopting technology to do e-commerce. Fintech banks are not changing their technology in terms of supplying financial services. Education is not providing education through the internet and so on. And why? And I think it's interesting. Abir's question is interesting. Why it seems that the index for some Arab countries is higher than even some advanced countries in terms of the adoption by technology. It's just you walk in the United Arab Emirates or in Qatar, you see people are connected all the time on their phones. You don't see that in the advanced countries. So because the other options for connecting by people are different. So it's a matter here. I mean, there is a whole domain of why people in the Arab countries and GCC particularly, they're connected. They're connected. I mean, they use Instagram much more than the Americans use Instagram in Arab countries and so on, because that's the better way, the easier way to connect, especially for women. Women don't have opportunities to go outside, so they connect through the internet. So there are constraints on the individuals in Arab countries which push them to connect, to use more internet and the new technology. Now, on the other hand, in businesses, adopting technology businesses is much more complicated matter. Businesses have to consider the costs, the business environment, is it favorable? Can they change the business models they have? They should invest. Do the regulations allow them to do it the right way? Do they have the cybersecurity is available to protect them and so on? So there are many more constraints on businesses to adopt digital technologies and much more risks. The risks are higher, the costs are higher, and the opportunity and the benefits may be more uncertain. So that's why you see this disconnect. That's why you need an active approach by governments on the business side, to promote digitalization business side, so that it can meet the objectives of better productivity and better jobs and so on. I'm sorry if
No, thank you. This is very convincing. Just as a follow-up before we move to Sharof, Paula also spoke of the risk that actually ICT services are increasingly tradable and produced anywhere in the world. So is there actually a risk that some of what was non-tradable services are becoming tradables and so are being lost to the region in terms of production because of this business environment and constraint that you're talking about? So is there this extra risk actually of losing what used to be a protected market before?
Do you want us to, do you want us to, or do you want to collect a number of questions on this?
As you, I mean, it was a follow-up, but if you prefer, Sharof, do you want to move before?
Yeah, I'm on this issue. I think it's a very important issue. That why this region that has a actually very large number of educated young people, also very strategically positioned region. Sub-Saharan Africa is moving very fast through the digitalization. They have made some incredible progress, like Kenya and so forth, South Africa. GCC, I think, is in many ways close to the advanced economies, but yet there has been some hesitation. And I think we should not forget that in advanced economies, especially when it comes to digitalization, it's the private sector that has been the driver. Even in India, I think in other developing countries, businesses are the ones that are moving and forcing the governments to change things and so forth. And I think in the Middle East, probably the businesses are in a very favorable position already. So there are maybe some monopolies that are resisting competition. Definitely the background papers that have been done for this study, by Franklin Allen on fintech and Bernard Hoekman on trade is that basically on fintech, the banks have been in MENA region have been very resistant to bringing technology in and opening up like the way it's done in sub-Saharan Africa through fintech. And so the role of government is important, and maybe the businesses are in a relatively comfortable position resisting major change that they could lose their comparative edge.
Thank you, Sharof. I'd love to hear some other voices. There are interesting questions by Farah and Ghassan. Can I ask you, Farah and Ghassan, to come in and ask? And then I want to follow up on what Sharof said and see whether Franklin and Bernard, who are with us, I think still with us, could come in and expand a little bit on the aspect that Sharof spoke about. Farah, could you come in? Can you come in? Or Ghassan Dibe?
Farah is on.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Thank you everyone for a fascinating discussion, which actually made me think over some of the assumptions made, not to counter-argue, but to follow up on these arguments. So one issue that captures my attention is polarization. So Mustafa, in your presentation, you said that there's no evidence of job polarization in this region, something that is usually comforting for other regions can be seen as a bit worrying in our region, especially if we take into consideration migration rates and the fact that, as soon as an individual becomes skilled enough, to climb up the ladder, this person leaves the region. So in that sense, we're ending up with a similar kind of low productive labor market, which, and this is why probably we don't have job polarization. But then probably what we could observe, and this is of course to be investigated further, observation in who can afford to leverage technology eventually. So even if now, and here I'm referring to income inequality, I'm referring to this political elite, business elite kind of partnerships in our region. So eventually digital transformation, given the governance institutional setup in some countries, MICs, specifically, we might end up with a digital transformation that reinforces monopolies, market concentration, rather than a competitive environment. These are my questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Farah. Could we perhaps also listen to Ghassan before going back to our panelists?
Okay.
Hi, Ghassan.
Hello everyone. Nice to see you, Isha and Mustafa and all. Yeah, I just had two questions actually related to issues of inequality as Farah advanced, and questions of monopolization of markets. I think also Farah touched on that, but more specifically on the question of monopolization. We live in a globalized world, and that could be either enhancing or constraining digital transformation in the Arab region. As we know, digital markets are characterized by what people call winner-take-all markets, and hence we see already increased monopolization in the digital sphere at the global level. How much is that a threat to the process of digitalization in the Arab region? Few companies dominate social media and other digital spaces and so on. And how much can we know most apps end up being app makers, according to like Brian Robson and McAfee in the second machine age, the average app technician or creator makes around $75,000 a year only. That's in advanced countries, while few make billions, because even if you are a little bit better than the other, right, the one who is a little bit better takes all the market. So how much that is that a threat to digitalization in the Arab region? And the second question is inequality, as Professor Fardoust discussed, has this skill is generated by skill-biased technological change, but that's labor inequality. We know that also capital labor substitution, where that could lead to a reduction in the labor share. And also, I tried in Lebanon, there's not much data on capital labor substitution, but I mentioned that and did a little indicative estimation of that. How much is that a threat in the Arab region? That it's not only that the skilled labor that is gaining from automation, but also capital, the capitalist class winning and increasing its share in the Arab region. And we see that, if we look at Piketty's work and so on, that this is leading to higher and higher capital shares in the advanced capitalist countries. Yeah, these are my questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Ghassan, and thanks, Farah. Also, we would like to jump in. Mustafa, yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Farah and Ghassan. These are excellent points. Let me try to emphasize one thing. In the advanced countries, we have observed two types of polarization. One at the jobs level, in terms of the workers level, and one at the firm level. The polarization at the individuals or workers level is the hollowing out of the middle skill. So the jobs which are routine and intensive are reduced, and they go either to low skill or high skill workers. And this evidence, there is a lot of evidence on that in US, in Europe, and so on. We do not find yet this happening in the developing countries. And there are many reasons for that. Many reasons for that. That is too long to go on, but there is work that shows that this is not happening in other developing countries for which there is data. We do not have such evidence for Arab countries. The only piece of evidence recently is a study recently by Ali Marwani on Tunisia, which does not find this polarization at the jobs level. The second type of, but this, and it may not be a big empirical issue in Arab countries. This threat is not so big. On the other hand, at the firm level, what we observe at the firm level is a divergence between the large technology adopting firms and the smaller and the firms who don't adopt technologies. Huge growth in the productivity of the first group, very low productivity growth in the second group. And this is one of the major sources of increase in inequality, because bigger firms tend to have workers, they pay them more and so on. So it's even the lower paid, lower skilled workers in the big firms, they earn much more than the other similar ones in the lower productivity growth firms. Now, this produces concentration, less competition, and so on, which produce all this inequality effect that Ghassan was talking. Now, this threat is real even in Arab countries. We have not been able to document it for the simple reason that there has not been much progress in digitalization in businesses in the Arab countries. But I'm sure this is a big threat. This is a big threat in Arab countries because there is a big threat that the winners are going to take a big chunk of the market, concentration in different businesses. You take it for education, you take it in retail, you take it whatever area you want, and there will be divergence, a bigger diversion that we have now, because we have these diversions between the bigger ones, the more productive and less productive ones. But it's going to be reinforced, going to be bigger, and produce more inequality in the region. So that threat, I agree with Ghassan that this risk is serious, and it might be something that we have to be watching out for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghassan. Thank you, sorry, Mustafa. This is really starting to characterize the region very, very much more. Shahrukh, you want to say a few last words, because we're approaching the time,
yes.
and then we'll also go to Paula for a few.
Yeah, the only thing I just want to add is that major changes are happening in the manufacturing around the world. That's where the large numbers are. And MENA region has not really, the manufacturing sector has not been a very significant sector. And I think that's why it's not visible. It's already happening in China and India. And even in Bangladesh, there is evidence that in textile industry, automation is coming. The issue is that if they don't, they will not be competitive enough to remain in this global supply chains. So this kind of forced change is happening, even if you have a low wage. It's just not as efficient. So the issue is maybe less jobs are being created. You see, rather than losing existing jobs, less jobs will be created that would have been otherwise in absence of automation and robotics and so forth. So that has to be taken into account. And also in the services sector, which has been expanding, we don't really have evidence that people have lost jobs, but there could be a combination of jobs and machines, machine learning and big data and so forth that would have taken place before digital revolution through more intensive use of labor. So the use of labor is not as intensive as it would have been otherwise. So the counterfactual is very important.
Thank you. Paula, you want to give us some last thoughts? And perhaps if you had a chance to look at the questions from Reem and Raghi, you could possibly address them. If you
no,
have.
apologies.
Okay.
It was like the chat was
worry.
like too crowded.
But let me summarize Reem's
Thanks.
question, because I think it's something you would be interested in. She asked, why is it that in Egypt people are very much hooked on foreign apps and don't use e-government services? They prefer to go to these services directly. Is it that they don't trust them, or that the e-services are not very well structured yet? Whether you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think the problem is only in Egypt. I think it's pretty common, like including in the US, where on the one hand is, the homeland of all possible apps and social media and development of this kind of technology that hook people to the little device, the phone, the iPad or whatever. And on the other hand, when the government launches like a major website for something like subscription to health insurance, or like this is a total disaster from all sides. So I think, there is like first of all, a disparity of the resources and know-how on how to deploy these kind of things in a way they're like people friendly and people, is prone to use them, to go there, like to satisfy their needs. Clearly, I mean, in terms of like commercial platforms, it will be like entertainment or connections or different kind of things, but accessing services is a need itself. And I mean, what happened is that very often, like the public interfaces, the public platforms are not user-friendly, are not easy to navigate. If they're not designed properly, risk to provide like additional bottlenecks to access the services instead of facilitating them. And I think this depends very much on the efforts and the resources that this giant of technologies are putting in making their platforms like easier for people to access and to be there, compared to the resources that the public sector is capable in many cases, like to invest there. So I don't know. I think, I mean, the whole issue of designing a good model for like for the digital interface of the public sector, it's something that still needs to be expanding. I mean, I'm sure there are countries we could learn from. Estonia, I guess, is like the first example that comes to mind, but how to translate the Estonian model into like pretty different realities in which it's not just the infrastructure, but it's also, I think, like one of the speakers touched upon this, the trust in institutions, right? So like, I mean, perhaps for an Estonian, it's like less controversial just to provide like all their information to be like captured in one digital identity, which definitely, I mean, creates like a huge leap forward versus societies in which trust in institutions has been undermined by other processes. Just like my 2 cents.
Thank you, Paula. I think we're several minutes late and we could continue for hours. This is such an important topic. It seems at the end of an hour and a half that we've barely really scratched the surface of a hugely important topic. But I would say in conclusion that actually, I think we've made a lot of progress in this session. Basically, we've moved as a group of participants and maybe as a group of researchers in ERF from not knowing what we don't know to starting to know what is it we don't know and we don't understand well, and that deserves to be really looked at because the future of the region is going to depend on it in many ways. And I think with what your team, the three of you, and all the researchers together that worked with whom you worked have put together is really a solid beginning. It shows what we know and what we don't know, and variations and question marks and mysteries that is going to be very exciting to look at in, I hope, a follow-up project or many that will come out very soon of your effort. If you only look at the list of participants here, you would see that there is enough to put together a globally best team to work on these issues. It shows really a keen interest in what you've been telling us about. So I want to thank you all very much, speakers, organizers, participants, and hope to see you soon in other places. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.